Hello everybody, welcome to UCFB's latest from their Insight Series, where leading figures from the world of football and sport share their career paths, their values and beliefs, the do's and don'ts that have led them to where they are now. I'm Mark Clemmit, and in my various roles for BBC Radio 5 Live, lots of different football programs for BBC One, and hosting loads and loads of events, including UCFB's Future Leaders Graduates Conference, and launching their global summits in Melbourne in early 2020. I've heard a lot of life stories, but few as inspirational as the one we're about to hear. We're going to meet dual Paralympian and England's most capped and decorated blind footballer, Darren Harris. Darren, do you mind if we start with terminology? Because a lot of us get frightened with this. Are we allowed to say blind, or are we visually impaired? What is right? What is wrong?
So I've never really kept myself up to date with the latest phraseologies we're supposed to use. I do believe it is, we use the term sight loss now, those who've experienced sight loss. But I think over the time that I've been around, we've had all sorts of terms: blind, totally blind, handicapped, which was probably one of the worst, partially sighted, visually impaired. But really, we're just people, aren't we?
Well, I agree. And I know, having worked with you before, that this kind of definition of you, because of how you are, is something that irks you. By the same token, if I'm playing devil's advocate though, mate, I suppose I would say that you won the amount of caps you have for England, 162, scored you 34 goals, won you 10 medals, European World Championships, because you were eligible to play for the blind team. So counter that if you can.
Well, who would have known what I'd have done if I could see?
Actually,
yeah. And my dad's nickname actually is Pele, and he was actually a brilliant footballer back in the 70s himself. And I think the story goes that he had dreadlocks and he refused to cut them off, and he sort of fell out with various clubs. But I think football is in the DNA somewhere.
Okay, but so do you allow your disability to define you in any way?
Not at all. No, I think what I've come to realise that I think at the start, people would think because you're blind that life's going to be difficult for you. I've come to see it as a blessing in disguise, actually. I think it's taught me things. It's given me opportunities that I wouldn't have had. And I think it was only really once I'd lost all my sight. I think that those early stages when I was losing my sight, those were probably the hardest. You know, I went through the denial. I didn't want to believe that my sight was getting worse. And then I went through that anger. I was just angry at the world, you know, for being blind. Why me? You know, I'd be angry at the dog owner who lets his dog poo on the pavement. I'd be angry at the car owner who parks on the pavement. But I think there was always that hope that one day I would get my sight back, because I think we all live in a time where we feel medical advances, and people say to me all the time, says, well, can't you do anything about, you know, getting your sight back? You know, we can put someone on the moon, we can do all sorts these days. But, you know, I'd go to the doctors every year and he'd tell me, Darren, your sight's getting worse and there's nothing we can do about it. And that made me really quite depressed. In fact, I just stopped going to the hospital for my annual appointments. And it was only really once all my sight had gone that I actually moved my focus. It's like, now I can stop thinking about getting my sight back and get on with my life and working out what it is I can do rather than what it is I couldn't do.
You see, that period, because you were 15 months when you were first diagnosed that you had a deteriorating situation. What age were you when you became fully blind, had full sight loss?
I would say
you were using.
Yeah, I'd say my 20s. It's really weird, actually, that you don't remember a specific point of which you can say, listen, I can't see anything. My sight deteriorated so gradually that on a day-to-day basis, week by week, month by month, you didn't really notice it. It was more like I'd think back, oh, a year ago I could do that and now I can't. I remember reading a newspaper and really straining my eyes to read it because it took so much effort and so much concentration. And so I just put it down and didn't pick it up because it gave me a headache. And then the next time I picked one up, I just couldn't read it. And that's kind of the sort of time frame over which my sight deteriorated.
How did you live with that uncertainty? Because as human beings, we like to know that what we have is going to be maintained. And then I suppose when we hit older age and we can no longer do some of the things we used to do, I suppose we have to come to terms with it there. But knowing that at some point you were going to completely lost it, I mean, how did that affect you, or completely lose it? How did that affect you?
I don't think I ever really processed it. I don't think I ever let myself admit to myself that it was going to go. Although in my heart, I knew that it would, but I never said that. If I bumped into something, I would just say I was just being clumsy, or, the lighting wasn't quite right. Certain conditions were better than others, but I really did skirt around that issue for an awful long time. I didn't want people to know I was blind. I would prefer people to think I was drunk than blind. So I always remember when I was at university that I would go out, I would refuse to use a cane, which is, what I used to get around. And I would bump into things. I'd bump into lampposts, I'd bump into people. And sometimes they'd shout insults at me, and it's like, look where you're going, stuff like that. And I would just prefer them to just think I was drunk and staggering around and actually admit that I was blind.
Where does this resilience come from? Where does this positivity come from in the face of a situation that many of us would probably give up on life having faced?
I was very lucky to have a mother that always encouraged me. She gave me the confidence to do things that quite a few parents in similar situations don't do for their children. One of the examples I can draw on is I was about 16 years old, and I remember getting the train back to Wolverhampton, which is where I'm from originally. And I gave her a call and said, Mum, can you come and pick me up from the train station? And she goes, no, you said you know where the bus stop is. I showed you that the other week. And some people might think that was being cruel, but actually what it taught me was that I can do things for myself. And so I got on the bus, I got off at the right stop, and I got home, and I never really looked back from that moment onwards. I did an outward bound course up in Scotland, and I remember my mum offered to take me up there. This is about a year later. But my mum's partner at the time actually smoked. And the thought of sitting in a car with a smoker for 4 hours filled me with absolute dread. And I just said, you know what, I'll get the train. And that was the first time I traveled such a massive distance on my own on the train. And it just went onwards and upwards from that. But I suppose in terms of resilience, I just think resilience comes through experience. People have said to me in the past, oh, I wish I could be as resilient as you. And I said, well, you'd have to have had a life like mine, or a life like a lot of the other people who demonstrate resilience as a great quality, that it can only be developed through experience. And it's like when you come through the other side, it's when you look back and think, how did I get through that? But when you're going through it, obviously it feels awful, and you'd wish you weren't going through it. It was happening to someone else. But that was my life. That was what I experienced. But now I've had those experiences come out the other side. It's something I can draw on as a resource to use in every other challenge that I face.
I get what you're saying about experience, but do you think we need to teach preparation for it, i.e., a long life will serve up curveballs? There are going to be loads of nice experiences, but there are going to be experiences that are going to test us. Sometimes it's just to use a boxing analogy, sometimes it's our turn to be on the ropes. Do you think we need to be teaching that more in school? Or is that popping the balloon? Is it better to just find yourself enmeshed in it and then?
Well, I think one way we can teach it, or that we can encourage it to be learned and developed, is sometimes to let people struggle. So I think we're too quick to jump in and help and to save and to rescue. You know, when the kid falls over, you know, you kind of run over and you pick them up, and you know, but how do you know that they wouldn't have been able to get it themselves? You know, would it do them any harm to learn to get up themselves? And so if someone's always picking you up, there's going to become a point in your life where they're not around. And I think that's what happens now, because some people haven't been through those challenging situations in their childhood. When they experience it in adulthood, it can almost be doubly worse. It's like, God, I don't know what to do in this situation because I've never ever experienced this. So, you know, when you know, for those who are watching this, who have got children and they're struggling with their homework, sometimes you have to let them struggle, because it's only really through that they're going to learn that they can do it for themselves.
Yeah, that's controlled struggle though, isn't it? Your mom being courageous enough to say, no, sod you get your own way home, you know what you're doing. You have to have a pair to do that. Not that I'm suggesting your mother has a pair, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know what inspired her to do that. And maybe she just couldn't be bothered to get dressed and get in the car and come and pick me up. Maybe that was her motivation. But I do feel it was a lot deeper than that. I think she realized that life was going to be challenging for me, and that you know, I needed to learn how to do things for myself. I think it was definitely a strategy of hers, and it does take confidence to let people kind of fall over and make. I'm a father myself, and when my mother's around, she's really funny, because now she's a grandmother. She's gone very risk averse all of a sudden. It's like, oh, you can't let your son do that, and you can't let him do that. And I was thinking, you weren't like that with me. So I think with old age, perhaps she's softened a little bit. But I'm very much of that. I want it, I want him to fall over and have a few scrapes and bumps and bruises, because I just think that's really important. It's really valuable.
Listen, I want to celebrate your life's achievements, and there are many of them. And I love the trajectory your life went on, and the fact you are a dual Paralympian. But I want to take you to a low point. First of all, you mentioned your anger. How much in danger were we of losing you, really going off the rails? Because you at one stage were heading towards bad lad territory, weren't you?
So my mum, I don't know if she meant this seriously, but I think she did. She basically said that if I could see, I'd be in prison. You know, those of us who've done work with young offenders know that there's a lot of very bright, talented people who are in these institutions, and it's often that we find ourselves in the wrong crowd, and that we're unable to control our aggression. For me, anger and aggression was actually a deliberate strategy. You know, when I experienced racism as a kid, you know, we were told by people around us that we just had to put up with it. For example, you know, just turn the other cheek, ignore it. But I would lash out, and it worked, because people actually stopped giving me grief. You know, if I punched them in the face or I threw a chair at them, then they didn't give me any more problems. So it worked to a certain degree, except for that I continually found myself in the headmaster's office, explaining myself. You know, I was excluded from school, and it was a real problem for me to kind of find a different strategy which I thought would be effective.
So how big a plank was football? How big a solace did it give you? And how did your career start? I
think sport in general, you know, any sport. I mean, as a kid, I was told to sit down and shut up quite a lot, and you know, I ended up being a footballer and a speaker, and I think that tells me something, that actually asking any child to sit down for 7 hours a day probably isn't that natural. but I was just an energetic kid. I just loved running around, and any opportunity that I had to play sport, you know, I played before school, I played during break time, lunchtime, after school, weekends. I just loved the outdoors. I loved playing any sport, whether it was running. You know, I was a pretty good runner as a kid. I even got half decent at swimming. It didn't matter what the sport was. It was just, and the great thing about sport is that you can see your progression. It's, I think in a lot of things that we do, sometimes you don't see yourself improve for ages. But with sport, when you're doing it all the time, you just see this kind of upward curve. Wow, I'm getting better at this. I can, you know, hit the ball that far. I can throw the ball that far. I can run this distance this quick. And there's this constant positive feedback loop. You just want to do it more because you're getting better at it. But I did genuinely just love it as well. And, you know, the camaraderie, you know, some of the trips that we had with the lads going to different places. That's my first trip abroad was through sport. You know, I never went abroad as a kid on holidays. You know, my holidays were spent at one auntie's and then another auntie's and then another auntie's. And if we're really lucky, we went to Rhyl or Aberystwyth for the day. So I never went abroad as a child. But so my first trip abroad was with sport. And you know, you want more of that, because it was like adventure.
But forgive me if I missed you saying it, but what was there a point at which you thought, yep, I can put my energy into this and this is going to take me to a good place? Was there a point at which you thought, you know what, I'm half decent at this?
I don't think I thought about the big picture long term. I mean, when I was playing sport at school, there was no real pathway for disability within sport. It wasn't as established as it is today. So I'm guessing there are lots of 12 and 13-year-olds now who have aspirations of being Paralympians. That wasn't really the case when I was that age. I just did sport because it was something I loved. And, you know, I went to uni, I studied maths. I was going to go and get a typical job in a graduate trainee program. And that's what I did. And, you know, when I made my England debut, that was just me playing football in the blind league, and the coach kind of spotted me and invited me along to one of the England training sessions. And so he spotted this sort of talent in me. But it was still an amateur setup then. You know,
it might well have been, but tell me about that moment when you realize you're on the verge of international recognition, doing something that so many of us aspire to do, but are never good enough to do. Take me through that, the emotions that you had, and presumably joy the moment you're pulling that shirt on for the first time.
Yeah, well, I remember my very first game. I was absolutely terrible.
Oh, right, okay.
I know.
Thanks
I
for
was
spoiling the story for me, mate.
I came on as a substitute, and the coach took me off after about 2 minutes because I was that bad. Wow. And it's a story he's told countless players that have come after me, because it kind of reminds us that, you know, success doesn't always come straight away. And the challenge for me really was that I still had a bit of light perception in those days. And, you know, putting on the blindfold really disorientated me. So, you know, he says, you know, Darren, you're going on now. I put on the blindfold, walked on the pitch, and I just didn't know where I was. It was so disorientated. I was running into players. I was running into the boards. I was just really lost out there. And it was really mercy he just took me off for my own protection and for everybody else. But, you know, I learned from that. You know, it was, but I was absolutely buzzing though. I was so excited. And I was probably one of the youngest players in the team. And I was looking at all these kind of older guys, just knowing that I was going to take their place. I was thinking, I'm coming for you guys. That's how I looked at it.
Wow. I mean, listen, there'll be people watching who are not familiar with the basics of blind football. Will you just share the blindfold and the bell and the ball, etc.? Will you just give us a few rudiments of this, just for those that have never seen it played?
So we play five-a-side. The goalkeepers can see, and the 4 outfield players are totally blind. we wear blindfolds just because some players might have light perception, and that little bit of light perception could make all the difference in terms of your confidence to move around the pitch, you know, with speed. We've got a coach who stands on the halfway line who can give us information, and we've also got a guide behind the opposite goal who can give us information. Actually, we did play a tournament back at the start of sort of the blind football journey. I remember Dermot Gallagher actually came to referee one of our games over at Banbury, and we played on grass, and we played 7-a-side, and the crossbar had a bleeper on it. So there was no eyes on the halfway line. There was no eyes behind the goals, and we got by. But I think to improve the quality of the game as a spectacle, I think the changes that we've made have made the game much better. We've got rebound boards, so that the pitch is enclosed, so the ball, you know, can't go out of play, and that's really how we play. The ball itself has got ball bearings in it, so when it moves, it makes a sound. And I think back in the day, we used to play in concrete, those kind of really hard ace pitches, but we've moved to 3G and 4G, and now this sort of lovely rubber crumb stuff, which, you know, feels like like a rug.
Yeah. I mean, where are all your caps? That's a hell of a lot. Do you get the sort of cap that you would do for the?
They don't give us caps for every single game, actually, and for some reason that. And perhaps if our performance director watches this, we can remind him that we're still owed a few. They're a little bit behind schedule, so I will chase him up on those. But yeah, I've got a few dotted about the house, and it's really weird, isn't it? You do wonder what you're supposed to do with all these things, like your medals and caps and trophies. And I've got a 3-year-old son, so all of my stuff's locked away right now because he'll break absolutely everything. But yeah, in going forward, I don't know what I would do with them. I don't think I'd have them out on display really is anything amazing. I think for me, just knowing what I've achieved is enough for me. I know the journey that I've come on. I know where I started. I know where I ended up, and I far exceeded anything I ever imagined, and that's worth more than any medal I've got.
Now listen, of course, the football is only half the story, because bolshy little beggar that you are, you couldn't play Athens 2004 football because GB wouldn't put a team in. So you decided you wanted to appear at the Paralympics and decided to take matters into your own hands and switch sports.
So I was a black belt in judo.
Okay, so you were already doing judo.
Yeah, I was already a black belt in judo, but actually, even though they call a downgrade, you know, you're a master of judo, there are levels within that. So I was way off the top judo players in the world. And I knew the only way I could qualify for the Beijing Paralympics was to train full time. It wasn't something that I could do a couple of nights a week and just rock up to the games. That wasn't going to happen. But, you know, I had a well-paid job at the time. I worked for an IT company, and I made that really radical decision to give up my job. I'll always remember the day I handed in my notice, because all of my colleagues came up to me, because usually you don't leave a job unless you're going to be paid more money or you're going to go to a better company. So they're all fascinated to see where I was going. And I said, well, I'm not going to any of our rivals or anything like that. I said, I'm off to do judo full time. It says, well, how much are they going to be paying you? I said, well, nothing. I said, there is a chance that if I perform well, that I could get on lottery funding, but I've got a passion, I've got a dream. This is something I really want. And I remember sitting in the office, and there was this guy that had been there for 30 years, and I was sort of chatting to him, and I couldn't picture myself doing another 20 years in that job. I just thought that would be the death of me. And whatever, and you know, giving up your job and handing your notice, it is a little bit like jumping off a cliff. You don't know if you're going to land safely or not. but it kind of keeps you in the moment. And I think there's a message for that during the current crisis that we're going through, that you have to stay in the moment. The moment you kind of escape and you're thinking too far ahead, what's going to happen? What if this and what if that? You're not focusing on improving every single day. So that's what I did. I just trained every single day and tried to make myself better each day.
Darren, do you feel fear?
No, I don't think I do. That's
a hell of a feeling to have within you, to not feel fear, to not feel anxiety, to not be frightened about what the future holds, but just to be willing to jump off that cliff and see what's waiting at the bottom for you.
Well, I'm probably a little bit scared of dogs. I do remember.
Okay, fine. Okay. Yeah.
I do remember walking down these alleyways when I was a kid, and I've been bitten a couple of times. And I remember walking down this alley, and it was quite dark, and this dog just jumped up on the gate, and I was thinking, I hope that gate's locked.
Okay, but big decisions. You sort of reach a decision. I mean, how would you make a big decision? Do you do it on impulse? Are you a sort of reasoner, and then when you're ready to make the leap, you commit? Or what? Why are you so fearless?
I think I believe that I have got the resources, whether it's within myself or that I know someone that can help me. I think I've always known that I could probably find someone who knows how to do what it is I want to do. There's very few things out there that haven't been kind of done before. It's very rare that you can't draw on the knowledge and expertise of someone else. And I think that's what I've always done. I think one of the things that helped me make that decision to go to judo was that we had this Russian coach, and he was amazing. He was probably the best coach I've ever seen. He was an oracle. I remember going to his house, and his house was just a library of books and DVDs, and he was a real scholar. And I think he gave me the absolute confidence that I could trust in him to give me the skills that I needed to get better. So it wasn't, I didn't probably have that confidence myself, but it was because I knew how good a coach he was that I knew that he could make me a lot better than I was, and he did.
I mean, you've gone on to become a best-selling author. You're a motivational speaker. You're a transformational coach as well. What are your sort of key beliefs, key mantras, key principles that you pass on when you are working with these different mediums?
Well, one of the things I'm talking about right now is something I'm calling a sort of a minority advantage. I think so often when you think of the word minority, it's seen as a disadvantage. It's you're told, and this message kind of gets under your skin, it gets into your body, it gets into your brain, that you probably can't achieve what you want to achieve. But even if there's one person doing it, why can't you be the one? And someone's got to do it, hasn't there? There's always got to be someone who's going to break that mold. I think so. We've all had ideas before, but so often we don't act on those ideas, and that's really what I can encourage people to do is to take action. Is don't die wondering, what if. So that's, you've got to take risks. Ultimately, there is a chance that things won't work out, but you'll never know. So taking risks is massive. I talk about scoring your own goals. How often do we, as football fans, as sports fans, we sit there in our armchairs celebrating, superstars doing these amazing things, and at what point are we going to sort of go and do that for ourselves? And it might not be that you're going to become a professional footballer, but it's about, why don't you go out there and have a go at whatever it is that you're good at, and become the best that you can be. So, you can't spend your whole life being a spectator. In fact, that's where it started for me. I went to Atlanta, went to the Paralympic Games, and I went there as a spectator. And I was there in the crowd watching it unfold in front of me. And that's when it came to me. It's just like, well, why are you watching this? You could be doing this. And I didn't know it was going to take me 12 years to get there. But, that's kind of where that seed was sown, is that, why can't you be the one?
Yeah, because most of us are mortal, and most of us would panic at the notion of throwing away a well-paid job. So where was your safety blanket? Where was your infrastructure for life's basic needs? Not the self-actualizing ones of being what you could be, but making sure you got food, shelter, water, air. I suppose you probably could. Most of us could find that.
I mean, firstly, we need a lot less than we realise. I think the current lockdown has taught people that in abundance. I've spoken to so many people over the last couple of weeks who said they've spent so little money. You know, they're walking instead of driving the car. They're eating food at home rather than going to restaurants and takeaways. We can use our resources in so much of a better way. But I did have a plan. I bought a house and I decided that I could rent out my spare room, and as long as I had enough money to kind of cover my mortgage, then really what else did I need? I was just training every day. I went to the gym in the morning, came home, had some lunch, I went back home in the afternoon, did some more training and came back. And that's what I did. I've just watched Eliud Kipchoge's documentary. I'm sure many of your viewers would have watched him, in this really simple life that he leads, where he just goes out and runs and comes home and has a massage and goes out and does a bit more running and comes back. I just got rid of all of those sort of trappings of life. I didn't go on holiday. I didn't want to go on holiday because I didn't want to miss a day's training. I didn't drink alcohol. That's incredibly expensive. And all of my friends who go out spend an absolute bucket socializing. But when you're around like-minded people, then they're just great fun to be around. You don't actually need to spend all of this money doing nonsense stuff, which you get no real value from. The value is in the camaraderie and the friendship and just doing something that you love.
I mean, you do enjoy the glitz and the glamour a little bit, because by 2012, when the Paralympics were in London, obviously, you had switched back to football. So that's where you got your double bite of the cherry.
Yeah, I mean, and I probably had no intention of going back to football, if I'm honest. In 2011, I had started just to pick up a few injuries. I know the body was just starting to break down. I'd broken my ribs the year before. I tore my ankle ligaments. And I just realized to get to the level of where I wanted to get, that my body just couldn't do it with judo. You know, it's a really physical sport. When I make the comparison between judo and football, I say that in football you kick a ball, and in judo you are the ball. So it's tough. And I remember kind of coming away from judo and being really, really lost, actually. I had no intention of going back to football whatsoever. And I remember one of my old teammates kind of called me up and said, would you be interested in playing? And when I'd left football, I already had 82 caps. It wasn't like I'd be going back as a beginner. But I kind of felt like I'd been there and done it. And it was like a whole different crowd. I didn't really know any of the players. The guys I left behind weren't the guys I was going back to. So it had kind of moved on. But I did come back, and it was a really tough year for me, to be honest. I think I really struggled. I had depression pretty much for those next couple of years, because there was this real loss. I think after Beijing, I'd split with my partner at the time, and I'd made this kind of commitment that that judo was going to be my thing, and if I was going to sacrifice my relationship, then I had to make it work with this, and it hadn't worked with judo, and so I was left in this really strange place where I didn't feel like a footballer. But I got through it. I mean, I came back, played 2012, didn't have my best tournament ever, if I'm honest. The coach dropped me. I mean, I was 39 at the time. Wow. So the coach dropped me because he was looking forward to the future, and he just kind of thought, we need to focus on the younger players. But things probably didn't go the way they were expecting in that next year. The coach, they got rid of him, and then the new coach came in and he called me back into the team. And then we had a terrible tournament at the Euros in 2013. So that coach got sacked as well, and I was back out of the team for another 2 years. So over the next 6 years, I was in and out of the team constantly.
You mentioned mental health. Do you have coping mechanisms now? Do you know what your triggers are that sent you spiraling previously for those couple of years? Have you got a little regime that you use now to keep yourself on the straight and narrow?
I always try to talk to people about whatever challenges I'm facing. So, when I am going through something really difficult, I have got some really good tried and tested friends that I can just talk. And sometimes you don't even need any advice. You just need to get those thoughts out of your head, and it somehow changes form when it comes out of your head, and it doesn't seem quite as bad as when it's in your head. And so that's one thing for me. Exercise is massive for me. So many athletes, when they finish their sports career, they don't probably feel they've got a reason to kind of carry on doing exercise. But you're in such a structured environment where you're training with a group of guys every single day, and you go away from that, and there's a massive void in your life. So, I've found a couple of good social running groups, which I'm part of, and exercise is a massive part of my life, even in retirement.
I've got to wrap things up. I want your top 3 tips for anybody watching. Top 3 tips that keep you motivated. Top 3 tips that might reflect your values and beliefs. Your interpretation. What would you like to share with everybody?
Firstly, I generally believe that everybody can achieve something amazing. I talk about 3 things. So I talk about doing it first. Don't wait for someone else to go and do it. If you've got an idea, get it out there. And it might fail, it might not, but you'll never know.
Nice. I like that.
The second thing is do it differently. We've all been in organizations where we see things being done a certain way, and we just go, why do they do things like that? And whether it's the education system, whether it's in your office, whether it's how your team meetings are structured, and you can see something that isn't working, and there's this kind of tendency to say, well, because it's always been done that way, then we've got to carry on doing that way. And I encourage people to just challenge that status quo. There are good ways and bad ways to do that. Some people don't really like to be told that the way they're doing things isn't the right way. And so there are ways we can learn to do that. But absolutely, if you think you can do things differently, then put it out there. And also around self-improvement, doing things better. I believe that first step is often the hardest. It was supposed to be the London Marathon at the weekend, and I know lots of people who believe they can never run a marathon, and it is a long way, but it's taking that first step, because that's the hardest step. Because once you've taken that first step, you think, okay, I've done that, maybe I can take 2 steps, now maybe I can take 5, now maybe I can take 10. And honestly, it's only when you look back on your life and you realize how far you've come, it's bewildering. I don't know how I got to this point, except for that I showed up every single day. And so if we just commit to ourselves to try and improve ourselves every single day, whether that's reading a book, whether that's learning a new skill, it's just that desire to keep learning and to keep developing and keep growing.
I wonder if you can help me with this. Communication, because you can't take advantage of non-verbal communication, I wonder how you read situations based not just on the words that are selected, Darren, but on tonality, how they're delivered, the timbre of the voice, the pace with which words are delivered, what inference you draw on the personalities that you interpret as a result of using the voice as this beautiful, rich instrument that it is.
It is an incredible instrument, and there's so much that you can glean from it. I think being blind, I do tune into the voice really, really well. So I often say that I will pick up whether someone's smiling, you know, I can pick up their mood. So some of the visual cues that you might get to determine someone's state of mind or mood, that often I can pick that up through the voice as well. And and this is something that we can teach people who work in call centers, for example, because they've only got the voice to go off. But it's really tuning into that voice. Yeah, it's something I've just learned over time. I mean, when I'm speaking to an audience, then I'll probably have to put in a few call and response type questions so I can just check in with them every so often. You know, I might not pick up on a nod of a head or something like that. And I'll often use humor to kind of let them know that they do need to respond verbally rather than just, you know, nod their head. So I'll say, you know, by the way, you know, putting your hand up or nodding your head is a complete waste of time. I will let them know that. So I'm setting my expectations really early in that conversation.
And have you learned to interpret people's moods through the tone of their voice? Can you tell straight away whether somebody's a happy sort of person, whether they're a sad person, whether they're grumpy today, whether they're ready to leave and go home early? Are you a pretty good judge from that point of view?
People watch lots of videos and there's lots of training around body language. So people learn how to probably mask their feelings with their body language. You know, they know what sorts of postures people are looking out for. I don't think there's as much training around the voice, and so people probably don't disguise it as well in their voice as they can in their body. So I think that's a real advantage for me to pick up on stuff that others might not pick up on just because I'm more tuned into it.
Like confident to the point where you would actually refer to it and say you're not sounding yourself today because you sense that in the way somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know, you can generally tell from just one word. You know, when you ask someone and, you know, how are they today, you can just generally tell straight away. I think most of you could do it if you closed your eyes and took away what your eyes are telling you. You probably would even pick it up yourself with your ears, but certainly with practice, you can definitely do it.
Mate, thank you. That's absolutely brilliant. Brilliant. I've loved the last hour, mate. Thank you very much for indulging. I think the biggest compliment I can pay you is I don't think you realize how uplifting a conversation is with you. I've absolutely loved that. Thanks for watching. I'm Mark Clemmit. Join us again soon for another one from UCFB's Insight Series.